Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Cults and the Culting of America. As you can tell from my not booming radio voice, Scott is not here tonight. But we are going to have I think, super fun conversation with our guest tonight, who's here to talk about the cultiness of Starbucks. And I have to say, I lived in Seattle. I did the entrepreneur scene. Now I live in a development that has both a Starbucks and a Whole Foods. So we got like all that cultiness up in here. Kasi, tell us about yourself. And also please tell us how to pronounce your last name.
So yeah, my last name it's Saganero. I feel like when you put your hands up like this, it kind of helps. But yeah, it's Italian. But a little bit about me. I mean, I'm not going to get into any of the any of the deep stuff yet. But basically, I grew up in a small town. First year of college, I went to work at Starbucks as a barista, and that kind of took me on a whirlwind trip to store manager. That was about 8 years of my life. I've been gone from Starbucks since 2021. I have a son now. I have, I don't know, I feel like just a full, I don't know, my life was Starbucks for about 8 years. So now, yeah, I am in a completely different field, speech therapy, actually. And yeah, have my son and I'm pretty content. That's me. I read and I crochet. I don't knit.
Lovely. I mean, we love all of the fiber arts on here. It's interesting how like carefully you were putting that of like, it took me on this whirlwind trip and now and like I could tell there's like a Starbucks time or maybe like a Starbucks Casey and then an after Starbucks Casey.
I definitely think that is the case. I think it was necessary to get me to where I am today. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty much my entire life, my entire young adult life, really. So my formative years. And yeah,
And
it took
that was the
me
first
a
thing
little bit here.
that was the first thing I wanted to ask you about was your youth. Right. So we know with cults, like they want you young. Another thing we talk about a lot on this podcast is the military. They want you young. They're out recruiting in high schools. And corporations also want to get you when you're young. What was that like for you? Like, how did you get recruited? What was it like? Like, are you working around a bunch of other young people? It seems like it could be a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely. So I was actually married once before to a guy who was in the military. So that's a whole other topic. But that took me to North Dakota, where this was in 2013. So there was a big oil boom. All of the service jobs were in such high demand that they were paying really well. So I kind of had my pick. And so when I went in and interviewed at different places, I remember very specifically at Starbucks, like here's a price difference here. So like I could have gone to work at Target for $15 an hour in 2013. Starbucks was $10 an hour. But I remember seeing the baristas and just like their high energy, them laughing behind the bar, and it just seeming like a very fun environment. And so the manager there, who I adored, she offered me the job on the spot, and I took it because I thought this is going to be so much more fun than working at Target. So yeah, there's definitely an element of fun. I was 18. And yeah, I don't want to like totally dominate because I could just keep going.
It's so interesting. So first of all, my family was in the Texas part of that oil boom. So Texas and North Dakota both have had those big booms. But here you are, you're a military spouse, right? You're 18 years old. You've just been moved to a completely new place, right? And like none of this has to be sinister, but this is exactly when a cult gets you, right? And
Vulnerable.
you're vulnerable, right? It looks like fun. And then that's the other thing. One of the things I tell college students now is like if a group is trying to recruit you and everybody is pretty and bouncy and shiny and happy, run away, right? Because that's appearance and attitude control. And I worked at Chick-fil-A for my first job out of the cult. So like you will smile, you will say my pleasure in response to thank you. So much of this almost like putting on your like happy Mormon face and like being a good salesperson.
I guess to that note, because you said it was your first job out of, and it was Culty. I will say, part of it was, I came from a low income background. I've been working since I was 14. Like I bussed tables, I cooked in kitchens, usually with older women. And so to see people who were my age and who looked like they were having fun, it was just very, it drew me in for sure.
Feeling. Yeah.
And then there was a moment, I think I was only at that location in North Dakota, I think would have been like September of 2013 to May of 2014. So not even a full year. And I remember the store manager looking at me and saying, like, you should just quit going to college and become a store manager. And this is me, a barista, 18, first year in college, just like, where is that even coming from? So I feel like they hit you with that very early on, with this is something you can do and you should just stick with us.
Yeah. That's interesting because I thought they were one of the companies that like paid for people to go to school. Do I not have that right?
So they started that program in fall of 2014.
Okay.
So I used that program. I wound up moving back home I moved back to the South. And I was going to a community college when I moved home, and then they came out with that program, which is the SCAT program. So I hopped on that bandwagon also. They really had their roots, or, their claws dug in.
Yeah. And it's funny because so much of that sounds similar to the military, right? Where it's like they will help you pay for the education, but two, they will keep you busy enough so that you can't necessarily use it all the time. And then when they do, identify in you someone who has like this leadership gene, that turns into a whole nother like cult experience.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's interesting to me because you keep using this language of like being drawn in or going in. And you already mentioned my favorite work phrase, we're a family. So we need to talk about all that. But like, identifying someone who is clearly like high intelligence, high potential, right? Willing to kind of do whatever it takes. Cults, and again, we're not calling Starbucks a cult here, we're just making parallels, right? But like high control, high demand groups, they love a high achiever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's this stereotype that cults go after, like, people that are not that intelligent or people that just need money, but like, no, you give them a like smart high achiever from a hard background and like nobody's going to work harder than that. Right. And I tell you, like cult kid to military pipeline is so strong. And it's just like, you said it, like you've been working since you were 14. Like you're going to get in there and you're going to work hard. You're clearly a person who's like easy to interface with. And cults identify that, organizations identify that quickly, and they'll start funneling like attention and resources into you. And then that feels really good too, right? You're just a kind of 18-year-old girl from nowhere, and now you're getting people telling you like you have a future in this.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember I've thought about this recently, actually, when I was promoted to, I think it was maybe ASM. It's like my first salaried job. Like driving to work. And this is the other thing. I drove so far. I could have worked anywhere closer. I drove 50 minutes one way, just to get there and make $10 an hour. So I think about that now and I'm like, what on earth was I thinking? But
Yeah.
I really, I don't know. I was bought in.
Well,
And
and
I
this is
remember,
why, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I just remember like crying tears of joy one morning on the way to work because I'm just like, thank goodness I have gotten out of this, like, really this poverty that I was living in. And I felt like that was all Starbucks and all of the leaders that had given me the opportunity. So there was that kind of feeling of gratitude that played into why I put so much effort in. But yeah,
Yeah.
now I look back
Downplays
and
your own effort. Downplays your own effort a little bit though, right? Um, and that's something we see a lot too. What I was going to say earlier when you said, it felt like a family or it felt like losing a family, right? For
Mhm,
me, this is always a red flag because families, I always say anything that calls itself your family wants to overwork you, underpay you, and expect you to put up with more BS than you would otherwise, right?
mhm,
And you already just took the job at a significantly lower salary, right?
mhm,
And many people do this. And this is why I think things like mission focused jobs, which I put entrepreneurship and startups and all of these companies that want to talk about their mission, right? It's not just not for profit companies anymore. All of
mhm.
them, it's like easy to get people to take less money and be more enthusiastic about what you're doing. And in fact, I was just writing this chapter in the book. There was a study that showed that like 40% of millennials say they would take lower pay for like a job that they cared about.
I could see that. I mean, I will say, um, coming from that world, that was something that I thought about when I tried to be intentional about what I wanted to do next was, even if I have to take a cut in pay to, this is the caveat though, was to have better work-life balance. I will do that. I'll do that in a heartbeat. Um, I think places like Starbucks and other corporations that I have worked for in the interim is that they try to really play up their benefits. They play up, uh, there's a specific company that's coming to mind right now, but leadership programs, or these programs that'll really quickly promote you through the ranks. Those sorts of things are red flags to me now because I'm like, I already know how this is going to play out.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like what's the difference between what they're telling the public? Right? When you say that, you're speaking my language because I'm like, "Oh yeah, the military does that all the time," right? Like what the words they say to the public and the actual experience that soldiers or veterans have can be very, very different.
Right. I don't know that Starbucks has what they call a leadership program at this point, or that they ever did have something explicitly like that. There was a different corporation that I worked for after Starbucks that had a leadership program. And that was specifically geared towards people who had bachelor's degrees and were willing to come in and they didn't have to have any kind of background with them, just willing to come in. And actually, they sent them on a retreat um, to corporate for a week. And uh, then they kind of had to perform for leadership when they came in periodically. And that was the process of moving up through the ranks. This was a completely different company, though. I was only there for a short while before realizing that was not for me.
Yeah.
Starbucks, I feel like, is a little bit more. I'm trying to remember because it's been years. It was 2021 that I left. They did have these development pages. Like there's a whole book. I think maybe called like a Starbucks success manual or something along that line. But it lined out for every role from barista to district manager what your role was, and then what you could do to like go above and beyond to demonstrate leadership. And then there was like a development page that was right on the back. So, I mean, that was there. It was available. Store managers definitely used it. District managers definitely used it. But I don't think they were telling that to the public necessarily. I think it was once they had kind of brought you in, they started, what is the word they used? Building a pipeline of talent was what was used.
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about, these programs, these leadership programs. I mean, this is kind of what I started out thinking that I wanted to do, is get, master's or PhD in organizational psychology and go be part of this leadership development. But I I mean, I agree with what you're saying, that like it they always present it as something that is for you, the individual. But it seems like once you get past the curtain, it's always about helping the organization. It's about how they can prepare you to be this good employee for the organization, which is not even to say like that's bad. Of course, they should be trying to do good things for the organization. It's just, I always feel like there's a little bit of a bait and switch in how this is presented.
I mean, absolutely. I'm not sure that I'm trying to think of like a bait and switch necessarily, but I mean, yeah, you could do everything on that piece of paper that says go above and beyond and demonstrate this leadership, and then maybe still not get a promotion, right? Because at the end of the day, it's an organization that only has so many openings, and maybe someone's only willing to move wherever. But one of the things that was alarming to me was towards the end of my time there, store managers had to get on a recruiting call. I believe it was once a month. And we had to keep track in an Excel spreadsheet the people that we on our teams that we thought could fill that next role. It's that pipeline, which I think in and of itself is not alarming, but we had to one by one present to a group, like a panel of store managers that were in our district, people that we wanted to promote, and tell a story basically about why they were meeting these expectations, or they demonstrated these qualities that were outlined in this success manual. And so the language had to be very specific. I remember having such high anxiety because I just knew as soon as you say the wrong thing, the district manager would catch it and say, well, if that's the case, if that's the word you're going to use, they're not ready. You need to go back and reevaluate. But having peers who really had not ever met these workers, had no experience with the dynamics of different stores, weighing in essentially on someone's career and their future, to me was unnerving. There was no sense of trust in our judgment. It had to go through this process and this group judgment, and that to me was nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Just everything you said makes me think about the military promotion process. And I mean, it literally is. You're writing like just these very, very careful evaluations, and that, it's that really specific language that always gives kind of closed system, right? Closed off group. Like, why do you have your own language that you have to describe things in that's not good enough for regular description, right?
Right.
And one of the things I noticed in these large, tech startups, I'm going to lump Starbucks in there with the Microsofts and the Googles and just like all the, fun West Coast stuff. And it's like one of the things is like they give you so many benefits, but it's all at their stores and on their campuses. And then there's a reading list that they want you to be reading for your, professional development. And then everyone's reading the same things and everyone's spending all their time together. And all of a sudden, it's like you said earlier, like it was like your whole life was Starbucks.
What is it's like an echo chamber. That is that is what I would most closely describe it as. On the note of them reading the same things. And, it's interesting because Howard Schultz, frequently, but when he was, CEO, of course, would post letters about current events, not just our business and what was relevant to us, but things in just the world and his perspective on it. Those things would get posted to like a hub, basically. So those would get printed and posted. So if the partners, right, they're not employees, they're partners. We have a specific word for it. But if they weren't logging in and reading that material, then the store managers would post it because they wanted it to be read. We wanted to read all the same stuff. I think that kind of evolved into weekly updates, which had kind of similar things. During certain periods, we would get actually like autobiographies from certain people that I guess Starbucks wanted a partnership with, because there were a number of books that were mailed to stores too for us to read. Onward by Howard Schultz being
being one of them.
Copies in the back, yeah.
So that, that's a very interesting topic. It's just like the deification of the leader, right? And I know from being in the entrepreneurship space in Seattle that Howard Schultz is very much worshipped as this brilliant man who did this brilliant thing and made billions of dollars, right? Like the thing everybody wants to do. Doesn't mean his view on politics is relevant to the employees at the company, right? Like it's very like when it's a college that has the name, when it is what am I trying to say here? Just like when employees are expected to know the founding story and like mythology of the organization, that's a big red flag for me. Like, why did I need to know the story of Adam Newman and Miguel meeting in an elevator to found WeWork, like to have an office there?
That's interesting because I've never thought of it that way, but that's absolutely what Onward was. And I remember it being gifted to me. We had, again, to go through this process of promotions, that initial barista to shift supervisor and then ASM. We had this program called Coffee Master, which I think they did away with and then they brought back. But that was something that they pushed me to do to prove or demonstrate, leadership skills, demonstrate commitment to the company and the coffee that was produced, to the origin story, the farmers that are in, Africa or in the South America that are farming and roasting these beans. Like we had to go through this program where we learned all about that. There's a book. And then lead coffee tastings with peers, with customers, and share that information. And when I went through the certification process, which was essentially just a leader who watched me do this, I was gifted the book Onward. And of course I read it, but absolutely, that's Howard Schultz.
Right.
Really dark origin story.
And, I think reading lists are so interesting to me, right? Like to me, there's like a 4-tier question about the organization. Like, do they have a recommended reading list? Yes or no? First question, right? If no, this doesn't apply to you. If yes, like, boom, that's already one level of influence, right? Just right there, the fact that the guy at the top wants you to be reading these books, right? Like
Right.
that's gonna influence what you do. You're gonna have more, and then it's gonna be more likely that someone else at Starbucks is reading that book too. So then you're gonna have someone to discuss that with. And then blah, 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 right? It's great for the organization. Then my next level is, are you expected to be reading something on that reading list at any given time? No, actually the military is one further, and you
Right.
look like you're kind of nodding your head. And I would imagine in many of these organizations, in these leadership programs, like you're expected to be doing some of these readings that your senior leadership has recommended.
I
And
would say
then,
it's not like an explicit expectation. It's that implicit undertone. Oh, you don't know this? Well, it was in this
mm-hmm.
book. But yeah.
Exactly. That was all over Microsoft campus when I worked there, for sure. And it was all the books that were featured in the bookstore. And then there's a third level, which is, are you kind of socially censured for reading books that aren't on those lists? And that's where I put the army. Like, you get caught reading fiction in uniform, and like, people are going to have something to say about it. Literally, when Kindles
Really?
came out, it changed my life, because I'm like, yay, no one can tell what I'm reading anymore, you know? Like, you simply cannot be a young woman officer sitting there reading Harry Potter, like waiting to go in for
Yeah.
your medical appointment, right? Like, you're expected to be reading something serious and like about military history.
Hmm.
And it does absolutely influence, right? And then, of course, the final thing is, does your organization ban certain books? You know, and at this
Right.
point, bad news bears. But it's just like little things like this that people don't think about, you know?
Mhm.
And when I got to Microsoft after leaving the military, I was like, I'm walking around and people have Satya Nadella quotes on their walls. And I was like, okay, it's culty. Like, it's culty.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, these are the things that
I still, you know, I've gone to one college, University of Texas at Dallas, no clue who founded that or why. And I got a great education from there. And then I went to that school founded by John Harvard and got an education there. And like,
yeah.
obviously, one, right, is like deifying this leader, making them godlike.
You know, this is, you know, again, I think I jokingly had called my experience cult-like, pretty soon after I had left. But just thinking about it in this light has been very illuminating. It has made me look back on certain experiences and just really question, where was my head at? Like, why didn't I see
Yeah.
this in the moment? But I think that just goes back to that original piece of being vulnerable and being
Yeah.
made to feel this gratitude and this, you know, almost like, I'm trying to think what it is that you had said about not really basically giving yourself credit for the work that you were doing, right? Like, you
Yeah.
feel like you're not doing enough for these people who have given you this opportunity.
Right. But in
And so,
reality, you're working for them cheaper and probably
mhm,
harder than you would otherwise. And yet you're feeling like only gratitude to them. Right. And
right.
that was why I was like, oh, red flag, right? Like,
Mhm.
you're not giving yourself enough credit for being the one that did all of this work. And,
Right.
you know, one of the things that when you're talking about this that I really started to see in entrepreneurship world was like, when they're keeping you, when you're joking that it's a cult amongst yourself,
Mhm.
right? When you're making that joke, like, or when you say your experience was cult like, right? Like,
Mhm.
what that means is they kept you so busy and so emotionally amped up all the time that you just had no time for anything
Right.
else, but you just felt super passionate about your mission. And like, it's so creepy to me when people say, can you have a good cult? Right. But that's kind of what people are saying when they're like,
Right.
you know, AA makes these jokes, lots of nonprofits make these jokes, Starbucks, I have heard them make these jokes, right? That like, oh,
Right.
it's like a cult. And all of these big conglomerates do it when they go do their week retreats that you mentioned that are just like these cult induction ceremonies.
Yes.
And again, it's not like harmful red line, right? But I completely understand what you're saying when you're saying like you felt like your experience was cult like. And then
Right.
especially if you're like looking more into high demand groups and you're like nodding, you know.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know, this is like one of the things that I was super passionate about was like understanding, first of all, individual trauma, and that we all pretty much need like therapy and recovery from that, right? And then I went and studied group behavior, and I'm like, so people have all of this organizational trauma, right?
Mhm.
And then it's just never acknowledged. And then you're just
Right.
supposed to like go back and do better, right? And so this is why I think that, you know, we're not saying Starbucks is the same as Children of God, religious sex cult, which I wrote this book about, and y'all can get signed copies attached, but it's like, part of the reason that I wrote a book comparing my experience in this horrible pedophile sex cult to my experience in the military is because people come through these things that are cult like. Your AAs, your super intense organizations, your nonprofits, teaching, nursing, right? Medical school, law school, and they don't understand why they feel like they have just been like hazed and tortured and love bombed and worked to death and then cut off from their family when they left.
Mhm.
And it can be very overwhelming.
Absolutely. I think two things that just stood out to me that you said, a little bit of the backtrack, but you said they keep you so busy and emotionally amped up. And then you just used the word love bomb. 1000%. They're towards the end. I believe this was like 2019. I graduated from the SCAP program. And in that process, I got to meet some leaders. I don't even remember what she would have been called, like RVP or something like that. But we got to meet with a group of SCAP scholars from across the country. They're in Arizona, and they had like a dinner for us. They had some sort of like, not really a conference, but it was like an open forum for all of the scholars. And so everyone came up and they told these emotional stories about their backgrounds and how they wouldn't have afforded college otherwise. And, people who, I remember one woman talking about how Starbucks saved her from her alcohol addiction. And I remember leaving that night in tears, hugging people. It was very emotional. And back to what you said about not giving ourselves credit for what we do, I left that graduation feeling so grateful for Starbucks and never once thought about the years of hard work and sacrifice that it took me to get that diploma. I was just so thankful for that company. And my mom will say that too, because my mom was there. And so she always is like, I don't know why you have this bad taste in your mouth, because they did all these great things for you. But there's the other side to that too.
Yeah,
So,
but does anyone listen when you talk about why you have the bad taste in your mouth, right? Because so first of all, that's called emotional evocation, right? Like, and I used to describe like cults always have some sort of ceremony where you're required to like lay yourself open to the group and just like
right.
sort of let them use you and your emotions and all of this. Um and you do. I call it hacking vulnerability, right? Because you're supposed to feel that way with people when you've gotten to know them and you've put in the time and you've
Right.
like gotten to this deep level, right? Sharing deep, hard things about yourself with another person does make you feel connected. Oh, what just
These
happened?
are people, that you're never really going to see again, right? Because they're from across the country. You did a distance program. And it's interesting that you say that, because I am such an introvert really at heart. And so I remember that day, like feeling compelled to get up there and tell my own story. Like I had a microphone in hand in front of 300 people. That's not Casey. That was definitely an emotional response. Yeah, there was that in 2019. I guess I'll finish what I was saying, but I was at that time even feeling a little disenchanted with the story I had been told, because I had graduated. I had applied for a district manager position. I'd been working as a store manager for, I think, 5 years at that point. And so I was told, if you do all these things on this piece of paper, you'll, go up to this next level. And I was turned down for the position, was not communicated with about it really. So I was disenchanted. And then really what kept me, one of my mentors there said, stay for a year. If you still feel like it's not a good fit after a year, then leave. It was 2 years before I left. But late 2019, so I graduated in May. In the fall, we had a leadership conference where all the store managers were flown out to Chicago on Starbucks's dime. And we had, this is store managers from across the country. So I want to say it was like close to 10,000 of us. We were in the Chicago Bulls Stadium. It was a huge, it was a pep rally, basically, for Starbucks. All sorts of big names were out. We had John Legend come play live music, talk about how he got his start because Starbucks sold his CDs. We were made to feel this specific way. And specifically at that conference, and this is what kept me longer than that year, was Howard Schultz had stepped down again. And the new CEO had come up on stage and said that Howard had met with him in the original Pike Place store there in Seattle, that they were sitting on the floor talking about the early days and what they had gone through together. And that Howard all of a sudden looked over at him and handed him the key to that Starbucks store and said, I'm trusting you with this. I'm stepping away. I'm trusting you with this. And so at that moment, all of the district managers, they come out with like a little baggie and they start handing out copies of that key to all of the store managers. And so he said, and I'm trusting you with your stores. And so that was like a very, it was definitely emotional. But I think it became like very symbolic. I had a friend who was put on a performance improvement plan, and the district manager said, give me your key back from the leadership conference because I no longer trust you with running this store. And so it was a very odd time. Somehow I walked away from that conference feeling better about Starbucks. But now looking back,
so first of all, this key thing, this is called like loaded language and loaded object. So, right, like this random item, a key, right? And it wasn't actually the key to their stores, right? It was just a random key that was handed to each person that now has all of this symbolism. And shockingly, cults use the key imagery a lot. A lot. But it's this like additional sort of way to control you through this internalized significance that is ethereal and hard to explain to somebody who wasn't there, to somebody who didn't experience that emotion. It may surprise you not at all to know that I'm ending my book about cults describing the Eras Tour concert and how that could be like the perfect setting to make you open, right? That's what this conference does. That's what these conferences do for these huge companies, right? They spend millions of dollars on this because it makes you more open. When you're chanting with other people, when you're singing with other people, when you're sharing yourself with other people, when you're showing emotion, laughing or crying with other people, right? All of these things make you feel more connected and make you more open to suggestion, right? When we chant in groups, it makes us more susceptible to suggestion. And your churches know that, and your schools know that, and your companies know that. Um, and I always say, like, when people wonder why they have these great, amazing conferences and then they don't go actually get anything done afterwards, it's because, like, your conference, that's what it's for. It's for motivation. It's for amping you up. It's for having these emotional experiences and connections. But if you don't go home and have business meetings where you actually put that stuff into practice, then it doesn't matter what you say, and it doesn't matter how good you made people feel. You can tell your employees all day, it's about you. It's about you. You're the ones that put us here, right? We trust you, all this stuff. But like, if you don't treat them at work like you trust them and like they're the ones that put you here, then it doesn't matter what you say.
Absolutely. I think I've never thought about it in that way, the conferences. For me, just intuitively, I felt kind of icky about it, right? Because I was that middleman of, I've got to bring all of this down. I've got to trickle it all down in a way that is, that is okay, that these people will accept below me, right? Because they're not getting the salaried job. They're not getting these benefits. They're not, they're making $10 an hour. And so I felt icky because we saw John Legend. I'm just like, how much did that one show cost? How much did bussing us around cost? These meals, the flights themselves. And so why could we not pay our employees more? That would have made my life easier personally.
Yeah.
But instead they spent all of this money to, like you said, get this emotional response. I mean, it worked for me, right? I stayed longer than I intended to.
So honestly, why this conversation is so good is because I think this is kind of the capitalist problem, right? Like, we've all swallowed this story sold to us by the tech bros and, the gods that rose out of the apocalypse of the intelligence era. And it's like, it's all about motivating, right? It's all about culture and motivating your people. But I really think that if an organization has to motivate you, then you're not getting what you need from that, right? Because if you're getting what you need from that organization, however you frame that, then you don't have to be externally motivated, right? But we have, in the cult of capitalism, right, asked for the consistent self-sacrifice of our members, which is step 4 on my cult list, all the time. Always sacrificing, always good for the group, always what the company needs, never what's good for the individuals, even though they promise it's going to trickle down, but we all know that's silly. And then it's like, how do you motivate people? And this, I mean, honestly, in the end, was why I didn't go become a practicing organizational psychologist at these big companies. It's because I see these retreats and I'm like, no, these are cult tactics. Like, say good, bad, indifferent, whatever you want. These are cult tactics, and it worked, right? They kept you there for an extra year or two. US military does the same thing in other ways, and another one we see a lot is being like, oh, well, don't judge it based off this one store, right? You got to go over there. You got to go. But like, they do these big meetings because they work to get you amped up and to get you with that feeling that it's so amazing and I owe them so much. And I'm just going to push aside all these little feelings. Like, why did you hire John Legend instead of just paying all of the people more?
Yes, 1000%. I'm just nodding because I'm like, yes, please just pay them.
Yeah.
I mean, the self-sacrificing aspect of it, I mean, I do think that is, more than just Starbucks. That's absolutely just this hustle culture, which I hate personally.
Yeah.
I think maybe hopefully COVID helped some of us reassess that. I know it helped me because it's just not. I remember, because of course my life, even though it felt like it was just Starbucks, it wasn't. I had all of these other things that were going on in the background that I just didn't have time to deal with. And gosh, I remember in the heat of the pandemic, I was asked to dual manage 2 stores. I think it was like 72 employees that I was responsible for, and a ton of sales. And I remember scheduling therapy like Tuesdays on an evening where I knew I was going to be able to do that and like deal with myself in my life. And I finally gave it up because I just had to come in and work those shifts. That was the expectation, was you do it. Because Starbucks is doing all of this for you. And ultimately, I don't think it's any surprise that my mental health did not thrive that year.
Yeah. So what was that like? What was kind of the crack for you? We've got about 7 more minutes. Can you tell us, like, what was the walkaway point for you? And then what was that like coming out of that high demand environment, like emerging from that?
So I would say this is to my own, I guess the best way I can put it is that last year, again, all of these things I had not dealt with, and then the highest pressure possible from leadership, in the midst of COVID, where we're operating under a complete different set of expectations. No, I mean, there's natural anxiety with that too. Like, we at the time didn't know, if you contract COVID, what does that really look like? Is it life-threatening for you? We don't know. Like, we were terrified. So my mental health definitely took it declined. We joked about the crying corner at the Starbucks store. I said, if it's a corner, it's a crying corner. And I think it was very apparent to those who I was leading that I was not doing well. And how that surfaced really was self-sabotage. There's not really a better way for me to put it. I sabotaged myself, really trying to protect my leader's image of me. In the midst of all of this stress, I did some things I really regret, honestly, and wound up taking a mental health break. I took a leave of absence, and ultimately was gone for I believe it was about 3 months. And came back, and it was terrible. It was a terrible, terrible experience. And I was 3 months pregnant, just very toxic. And Haley, I don't know if you should edit this out. I don't know how transparent I really need to be, because I don't want it to affect my credibility. But I mean, I ultimately was fired for violating a procedure for COVID. But I think the way that it was even worded was basically that I didn't fit a value system. You are not, what was it? Transparent. It was a value.
The COVID procedure was not why. I was there.
Yeah, no, that wasn't what even was really on the paper. It was, basically, I can't trust you. This was the same person who took the key. It was very much like that Starbucks verbiage.
Well, and it was also after you took a mental health break, right? And I think this is very significant. And as you were telling your story, I was just like, oh, this reminds me of what happened to me on the way out of the Army. And it was not what they said it was that ended my career, right? And trust and believe, when you're trying to like tell that story, it's difficult because we do all make bad choices, right? Like when your cult experience is blowing up, right? When you are getting to the high part of the high demand organization and you're maybe about to jump off, right? Like, we're messing up, we're not thinking straight, and all these things are happening. But at the end of the day, they didn't uphold their promises to you. And this is what we see over and over again. And this is what I felt with the military. And this is, I think, the crack in the brainwashing for a lot of people. It's that they will at some point see that the organization is always going to look out for the needs of the organization. And it's honestly, I think, sometimes worse in these organizations that tell you you're a family and they love you and build up all of this feeling, and then they're still going to choose money and the organization at the end of the day, and that will break your heart really fast.
Absolutely. I will say, on the note of that, I think Starbucks, especially towards the end, really talked a lot about mental health and how important it was. They paid for Headspace memberships for everyone to help support that. There was an EAP program. And I remember in the conversation right before I left for my leave of absence with my leader saying, I've been wanting to take leave of absence, but I know there's a stigma and that I'm going to be asked to step down if I do. And so I haven't because I can't. And her response was literally, well, maybe you should step down. And I said, again, I can't. I'll figure this out. But wound up taking that leave of absence. And I think, that probably played a part in it.
Yeah.
I wasn't willing to step back, but I knew I needed time. And it just makes me wonder, it makes me concerned about these places that say they value their mental health, but still carry the stigma around, if you have good mental health, then you should be able to lead, you should be able to perform. And that ultimately, if you ask for help or you need help, then you're not capable of performing. To me, that's concerning because at the end of the day, everyone's just trying to make sure they can have a roof over their head and feed their families. And then there are these companies out there that they're telling a story, but it's not the truth.
Yeah. And, I think when these companies say we care about your mental health, right, what they mean is, here, we'll pay some stuff, take care of yourself, make sure it doesn't affect us, right? Like, that's what they mean. It's very similar to when people find out you're neurodivergent and they're like, no, you can unmask around me. And then they're like, oh, wait, no, we didn't want that. Right. Or like when men say they like women without makeup and then you show them actual pictures of women without makeup and they're like, what? But this mental health thing, this also fits with like a lot of times for people, the crack in the brainwashing is a medical emergency, and that can be mental or physical. But I believe it's you see in that moment the truth, kind of, right? Like, in like a gothic movie when the lightning flashes and you see the silhouette and you're like, oh, they're always going to ask me to sacrifice for the good of the group, but they're not willing to sacrifice for me. And that's one of the things I look for, by the way, now when an organization wants to say they're a good organization. I'm like, point to where you sacrifice. When there's a choice to make between the group and the individual, show me where you sometimes choose the individual. It doesn't have to be always, but it does have to be sometimes. Otherwise, you're just taking from people. You're just a vampire at this point.
Absolutely. I said earlier, I felt like I had left a family, and, I think, I did kind of mourn a little bit, but I think over time and given some space, I realized that what I was mourning was really more this idea of what it was, this gratitude that I had felt for all these years, these emotions. It's like in my head, I really thought that they were looking out for me and they had my best interest. And that's what I mourned more than anything, I think. And now it's just like, you have to your point, kind of work through that trauma and kind of come back to, okay, who am I and what do I want out of work, out of life? Because got to look out for, honestly, like they're just looking out for number one, right?
Yeah. And it's a very real thing to like mourn the version of you that believed in that, right? Like it is easier to not have your eyes opened. And this is, when people lose religion or belief, it's not just all of the other exit costs, but it's also like belief is nice. Having that belief that this organization cared about you, this big successful organization cared about you was really nice. Kasi, it's about time to wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Y'all see, they don't have to be doing things to children in basements for organizations to have negative effects on their people when they operate in these high control, high demand kind of ways. And it's so interesting to have you come out and tell us your story. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on here.
Sorry, everybody, about our technical difficulties that we had here toward the end. We will fix ourselves for next time. Please like and subscribe this show. Tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your dad. Definitely send it to your MAGA in-laws. We have interesting guests almost every episode. And my book, Uncultured, about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and then going into the cult of the U.S. Army, you can get signed copies of here. It is also has a 4.9 rating on Audible and is on your Spotify Premium.